The notes from our previous meeting last Sunday are on the wall, and everybody should take a quick look, and if there's questions about the shorthand up there, we'll entertain those later. Let me introduce who's at the table. My name is Jim Lamport. The far end is Dan Glaser, the actual founder of this effort and idea in its current incarnation. And this is Andy Caffrey. He's the other person who's been meeting with us regularly on Monday afternoons, talking about the prospects for a new political system for us all. And here's Clendenen, our excellent 2nd District Supervisor. And our special guest today is Alisha Oloughlin. She's from LAFCo, which is the Local Agency Formation Commission, which is the body that deals with special districts and cities. So without further ado, Cliff has a few words for us, and then Alisha has a presentation for us about the actual bottom line legalities of making a new city.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So I guess I would say that the county's position and my position on a venture like this would be neutral. It's not a question of whether this is good or bad for the county, but in my mind, it's what's good and bad for the community down here. And so I think the biggest thing that I can do in this process is act as a resource for access from the group here to any county resources. And so one of the earlier meetings we had a couple months ago, it was Jim Lamport and Dan Glaser and Woods and I met with Joe Mellett, the Auditor Controller, and our County Administrative Officer, Phil Smith-Haynes. And between the two of those folks, kind of gave a rough outline, more of the budget process, and how does it pencil out? And one of the little keys, there's different tax rates in different tax districts. Garberville, for instance, is one. Different rural areas are others. They're based on whether there's a fire, what fire district is attached to that, whether the hospital district is part of that or not. So it's government makes things very complicated. So there's lots of little tax districts. So somebody on that side of the county is going to pay a different amount than that side. And a lot of these things are based on when they started. And one of the significant dates for any study like this is when Prop 13 came into being. And Prop 13 froze tax rates at a 1975 value. And so from there, it only comes up incrementally. So property tax is much lower than it might have been. And partly because of Prop 13, there haven't been very many city and corporations really statewide since then. I think in the county, Riadale in the 60s was the last city formed. And the bulk of that reason is because of the financial challenge. Between Joe Mellett and Phil Smith-Haynes, they looked at the Garberville tax district, the property tax, and on the property tax side, you have about $500,000 collected. But of that, when it finally gets whittled down, it's percent of this, of a percent of this, percent of this. The amount available to the new city would be about $20,000 of property tax, the way it's all whittled down. And again, the math is long and complicated. I wasn't even going to attempt to recreate it here. Then there's other taxes that I know will get discussed here, transient occupancy tax or the bed tax. But in large, what you'd be having here from the financial perspective would be self-determination, certainly, but then the burden of providing those services. So it is a challenge. And so again, I guess the strongest thing that I can do is to try to help provide access to the county folks that once there's a defined question asked, try to get this group to to that answer, get that calculation back. I know it's been discussed what size that city would be, that potential city, what it would include, what services would you want to include. There's cities now that, like Trinidad and Blue Lake, and they contract with the county for law enforcement services, for instance. So there's a lot of models out there. Uniquely, Ferndale decided that they wanted to do their own environmental health inspection. So the restaurants in Ferndale are inspected by a local nurse practitioner, Robin Smith. So there's a bunch of ways you can decide what that future is going to look like. But I think from those early meetings, the strongest takeaway I got was that it's a real challenge to find the money to do that. So certainly as Dan was talking about the marijuana economy moving forward, I think there needs to be a strong look at how to capture some of that, capture some of those dollars to make a potential city thrive. So that's my little general overview here of how I see this, and happy to be here and happy to assist in any way I can.
Thank you, Cliff. Alisha, I think we're ready to hear from you.
Okay. First, I was just going to give you an overview of what LAFCo is. We are the local agency formation commission, and our powers are authorized under the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act, or CKH Act. And basically, the CKH Act establishes procedures for local government changes of organizations, including incorporations, district formations, annexations, and such things. And we oversee service extensions and service provisions within those areas. And some of the powers granted to LAFCo under the Act include an act of adopting local agency boundaries and overseeing boundary changes, and to adopt and then periodically review and update district and city sphere of influences. And I heard there was a little bit of confusion as to the difference between a boundary and a sphere of influence. The boundary is the area to which the agency has actually been granted via LAFCo to provide services within that area. Whereas a sphere of influence is a plan for probable physical boundary service area in the future, or as LAFCo sees it, within the next 5 years. So we basically review a district or city's sphere of influence every 5 years, and we look at the probability of providing services in that area, the likelihood, the need, and then any kind of existing constraints. And then we then either keep the sphere as is or adjust it as necessary. So as far as your immediate foresight, we really want to focus on the city boundary, and that does all have to be within Humboldt County. I know there was some interest into migrating a little further south. The sphere of influence can include the county of Mendocino, but the entire boundary does need to be within Humboldt. And the sphere of influence determination also can be postponed for 1 year after voter approval if the city is approved. So just to keep that in mind, you should really focus your effort right now just on the city boundary and where you're probably going to provide services. And then a city may be either a full service or a contract city. So as a full service city, you are required to provide certain services within the city boundary. And those services include general legislative functions, land use planning, public roads and property, city property maintenance, and also law enforcement and animal control. And law enforcement and animal control may be provided by contract with other entities, such as the county in this case. And then in addition, there are a lot of services that the city may provide if they so choose, such as fire protection, water, solid waste management, flood control, etc. As part of the sphere of influence review, once your city is established, LAFCo basically reviews the city's existing boundary, their sphere, and then all municipal services provided. And the idea is to, like I said, identify where the service needs are, where any gaps may exist, to adjust it accordingly. And I don't know how far you really want to go into the process of establishing the city, so I'm going to give you sort of a general overview and not get into all the nuts and bolts, and then just answer any questions that you may have. So it's a rather long process and a little complex. But basically, the application filing procedure starts with an initiation via application, and in your case, that's going to be via the registered voters or the landowners in that area. And so the way that works is that you would circulate a general petition, and that also helps determine the level of support for the proposal. So it's really good to get that out there. And also in the first steps of this process, you should start an early assessment of the revenue issues, as Cliff was saying, the revenue neutrality issues, and really get a real good idea whether or not your proposal is going to go, get off the ground, because it can get quite expensive to pursue it, and then it'd be a shame to not have the finances in place to make it happen. So once you circulate this petition, it needs to be signed by at least 25% of the registered voters or the landowners in the area that you're proposing to be within the city boundary. And then if you were going to, this was brought up over the phone by Jim, so if you're inquiring as to how to obtain the number of the registered voters within that area, what you would do is you would contact the county and you'd ask for the county's GIS spatial data. And at that point, you would already have established your preliminary boundary. So once you have that spatial data from the county, you can then identify the APN property addresses and owners. And you can determine, obviously, the areas inhabited or uninhabited. And then you can obtain the voter registration list from the county registrar of voters. And you'll have a solid number of people residing in that area. So the application contents basically consist of the petition, the application, and a description of the proposal, a plan for services. And so this is really what LAFCo is going to look at as far as project approval. We're going to take a hard look at the plan for services and the comprehensive fiscal analysis, and really get a grasp on whether or not you'll be able to provide those services to the residents in a timely and efficient manner. So after the application is submitted, you'll do the comprehensive fiscal analysis. There'll also be a CEQA review required. And all of that information will then go to public hearing, to LAFCo public hearing. And if the project is approved, and first I want to actually tell you some of the proposal evaluation factors that LAFCo will consider in the approval. The population growth and need for services, the cost and adequacy of the existing services, the ability of the agency to provide the services, including sufficient revenues, the probable effect of incorporation on the area and adjacent areas, the effect of social and economic interest in the new city and the county government structure, and the conformity of the proposal with LAFCO policies. And you can find those specific policies in the CKH Act, but some of those include protecting prime agricultural land and trying to curtail urban sprawl, and again, trying to make sure that services are provided in an efficient way and that service extensions are not, service extensions are minimized to the extent practical. So if the proposal is denied, then you'll need to wait 1 year before you can repropose or refile with LAFCo. And if it is approved, there'll be a protest hearing that will be held within 35 days of the resolution. And so that would give all the public and any affected agencies an opportunity to further comment. And then lastly, there would be an election. So So if we pass the protest hearing, it will go to election, and the election for incorporation will be placed on the ballot. Oh, I'm sorry. If it passes the protest hearing, then the resolution is in effect. And then you would want to go to election to get a city government in place. So the election for incorporation would then be placed on the next general county election ballot. And that's a real overview of the process from start to finish. Is that clear? Do you have any questions?
I just had a couple questions.
Sure.
I'm just going to jump right in if I can. Could you tell me what the standards are for protest? Isn't it a certain percentage of property owners, or, you know, what's a protest would stop
It's,
without an election?
yeah, isn't it 50? I haven't actually, I believe it's just over 50%, the majority protest.
It has to be majority protest.
This was recently held when we moved ahead for a Scotia CSD, and then by mandate, there's a protest hearing. So once the LAFCo's made their decision, if there was, and whatever that percentage is, if there's a certain percentage, and it's a significant percentage of the folks in Scotia that did not want that, and I believe there was 2 in that case.
Right,
So
so,
it went forward.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but I just confirmed your footnotes. So, yeah, the proceedings were terminated if a majority protest exists.
Is there a level, though, at which it has to go to an election? It's not just approval or too much protest. Is there like a 25%? What triggers an election to find out if the incorporation should happen?
The election, as far as everything that I've read, and this is the first time that I personally dealt with the city corporation, but the election is a mandatory part of the process.
Oh.
His election is to fill the city positions, not.
Not an election to find out if there should be a city.
Is the election countywide to get the approval for the city, or is it just within the area that you want to do the city?
It's just within the area that you want.
Oh, it's not the whole county then?
Right, no, the election, the countywide election is to get your city officers
But
and
it's the
council
people
and
within
police.
the city.
But it's not an election to see whether or not there's going to be an incorporated city.
Not
Decided by
exactly.
LAFCo.
That's exactly,
Decided by LAFCO.
that's exciting.
Who appoints LAFCO?
There's a petition process, I'm sorry, I probably wasn't clear. There's a petition process that takes place locally. And the election is after the approval has after LAFCo has approved the incorporation. And that election is, like I said, to get a city council in place. But the actual deciding body is LAFCo.
25% of the registered voters in that boundary have to say yes, and then you have to go through the process that she just outlined, and
That's
then.
it. Okay.
I have to butt in, somebody's got a Pathfinder out there with lights on,
Thank you, folks.
locked off, my goodness.
Who appoints LAFCO?
The Supes.
Is there a LAFCO in each county? Is there a LAFCO in each county?
Yes.
No, there's one LAFCo in Humboldt County. There are 2 members from the County Board of Supervisors, 2 city members, and a public member. And 2 district members, sorry. And so the district members are actually elected. We send out a ballot to all the districts, and we allow them to elect on those members. And then the city members are appointed through the Board of Supervisors, as is the county members.
Fred?
Of the required services, which ones can be contracted?
Animal control and law enforcement.
And what about fire?
I'm sure that you can contract, you're not required to provide fire services, it's optional.
But roads cannot be contracted.
I got this information from the OPR, Office of Planning and Research Guidelines for Incorporation, and based upon that, they did not say that public roads could be provided by contract. They specifically listed that law enforcement and animal control were the 2 services that could be. I took that to mean that none others could.
And if I could just add in here, oftentimes in governmental situations, based on need or proximity or capacity, you can do memorandums of understanding or MOUs, so I could see where this city could contract with someone else to do a specific service, other than ones that are legally mandated. I can envision that, I don't know that for sure.
And you would have to have a department of roads and so on, and then out of that, the contracts could be generated.
And I don't even know if you'd have to have, in this small of a scale, even have a department. That could be, one of the things in the city manager's portfolio.
Bob?
Two questions. The election, is it go on a general election ballot, or is it a special election?
It goes on the general election ballot, but I believe you have the option for a special election if you want to finance that.
Okay, and the other question is, the initial approval by LAFCo, what are the criteria for approval? I mean, are you actually looking at a budget to see if there's enough money to provide those required services?
Very much so.
So it's cut and dried in terms of that there has to be a demonstration that there is actually enough money there?
Yes.
And the money comes from, if only $20,000 come from property tax, where does the rest of the money come from?
That's the $1,000,000 question.
Where did the rest of the money go? That other $180,000 to the town?
Can you hold your question to me? I'd like you to say something about, in a general way, where most cities or the 7 Humboldt cities get their revenues and where most of their expenditures wind up going, to the extent you know. And I want to make it clear that, we have lists of dozens of questions, and we've just scratched the surface on some of them. But as Alisha said, the steps in outline sound very simple, but it's a complicated process when you delve into it. As I understand it, the first step is circulating a petition and getting the required 25% of the registered voters in the proposed area. And then the bigger, possibly more significant step is generating a thick, comprehensive fiscal analysis that says where you're going to get your money and how you're going to pay the required, for the required functions of the city. And part of the research we're doing is to look at and tear apart the budgets of the 7 existing cities so that we have a much better sense of where their monies come from and where their monies go.
Jim, the woman with the Apple computer had a question for the.
Okay. Janine?
Yeah, McKinleyville has been a city that has been trying to incorporate for a number of years, and I was wondering if you could disclose or shed light on what their barriers have been in the process.
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I did try to find out the answer this week, and I will continue to do a little research and see if I can get in touch with the McKinleyville CSD manager and find out the answer to that question. But I read the McKinleyville Corporation feasibility study, as did Ms. Guys up here, and it seemed feasible. So what happened in the process, I'm really unsure. Whether it was just politics or lack of sufficient revenue, but it did appear feasible.
And a follow-up question, we've been looking at this McKinleyville 2000 proposal, and I noticed near the beginning of the packet, there's 3 alternate boundaries described. So this is a pre-petition step, obviously, because without a defined boundary, you don't even know the petition number threshold. But like you, I looked at this and it looked fairly comprehensive, and the feasibility that they were hoping to demonstrate looked like it might be there. So we're going to find out what happened with McKinleyville.
And again, Jim, just to build on something that you had asked about earlier in the week, I'm sorry, I'm going to hold that thought until after Philip answers.
Well, how about some feedback on this 2000 McKinleyville document with the 3 proposed boundaries? Is LAFCo currently looking for something like that?
Well, no, and that's kind of what I'm saying, is that we don't require an alternative, and you asked how many alternatives are required in the proposal. LAFCo is mandated to review all alternatives provided. So if you amongst yourselves decide that you have a couple options, but you can't decide on one specific alternative, you can present those to LAFCo and we will review all alternatives. But you're not required to present more than one. And in the case of obtaining the registered voter information petition, it may be your advantage to really just decide upon what you want your boundary to be. And that would be the proposal that you would present to LAFCO once you have a pretty firm understanding of what it is you're asking for.
Right.
So if I could just throw in a couple of general pieces about where the money goes for some of the cities that I'm a little familiar with. Fortuna, for instance, half of their budget is police services. So any public safety employee, whether it's police or fire, if they're on a round-the-clock shift, it actually takes 3.4 positions to considering 8-hour shifts and then sick time, vacation, whatever. It takes 3.4 positions to do one 24/7, 365 positions. So for the Arcata Fire Department, for instance, that's about $400,000 a year for one paid firefighter. And so we are blessed in Fortuna and Garberville and a lot of Redway, a lot of places to have volunteer fire departments. That would be a budget buster to have those. So for the city of Fortuna, it's about half of their budget to provide police services. One of the challenges for the city of Eureka is that they have a paid fire department. And so basically police and fire are kind of competing for those public safety dollars. And especially in a sales tax downturn, which is we're creeping out of now, that's why they're really struggling. So to the McKinleyville example, I think the best way to do that would be to have a little. I'll get something and send it to you, but it's not. I don't think there would be any heartburn on the county's part if I mean I think we would, for my mind, we would support any city like this one or McKinleyville that wanted to incorporate, but it's this very complicated cycle of Prop 13 and tax shifts in the relationship between the county and the state that it just doesn't pencil out. They would be at a disadvantage to McKinleyville, for instance, would be, and they've looked hard at this because they're close. They've got a very strong community services district that does water, sewer, parks, maybe even a couple more functions, and they're not that far away, but it doesn't work for them. But I think rather than speculate, I'll get a little printed out spreadsheet of the analysis of how that is now, and then why it isn't working for them. And that might be something that would inform you folks.
And if you'd like to look over the municipal service reviews for each of the cities, there's a breakdown of the city budgets and each MSR, just very general of their primary revenue sources and their expenditures.
Is that available online?
They are HumboltLAFCo.org.
Questions? Sandy?
Yeah, I'm wondering where GSD is in their process of their MSR and their SOI expansion with LAFCo.
We are still in the MSR SOI update process with GSD, and we are currently waiting on the district to really map out their proposed boundaries and their proposed sphere. And so we were asked to kind of step back for a few months and give them an opportunity to gather all of their information, create some draft maps, and basically present sort of a proposal with their ideal boundary and sphere of influence would be. And that's based upon their current water improvement project and some of their future plans. And then LAFCo is going to look at all that information and the other factors that LAFCo is required to look at, and then adjust the sphere and boundaries appropriately. So to make a long story short, we're kind of in a stall out phase. We're waiting for the district, and we hope to be we are hoping to wrap this up probably in the next, it was originally May, but it looks like it's being postponed July to the end of this year. I mean, we realize it's a priority and we're trying to expedite it, I should say.
And I believe that's a very pertinent question because as we wrestle with this proposed boundary issue, one of the things that first logically comes to mind is the existing service district boundaries. And I've got some maps, I don't think I have them posted, but in my file I've got some semi-useful maps of the existing service district boundaries for Redway and Garberville. Okay, great. Actually, I think those are zip codes and fire districts, actually. Terry, you had your hand up with something?
Yeah, I don't know if this is an off-the-wall question, but when it comes to making boundaries for a town that might be encompassing Garberville and Redway or some amorphous aspect of Garberville and Redway, would the McKee lawsuit have anything that would or be detrimental to this process? Because the town would want to incorporate or want to include all of that area as this new town as Garberville. So how would all those sorts of processes, some people say that the alternates for McKinley, but also the fact that McKinleyville is facing development and some of those alternates has impeded the process. And I was just wondering if lawsuits and proposed development or what some people would call sprawl in the McKee tracks influence this process. Does that make sense?
That's a new question to me. It hadn't occurred to me before. Cliff, what do you
I'll take a
think?
stab at that. I don't think it would affect that. That's referencing the statewide Williamson Act, and there's not a lot of Williamson Act land inside cities that I can think of, but.
So you went, because Alder Point's up there, and some people think that would be a logical way to extend, is just encircle everything that's already developed.
If I was down here drawing lines, I would ignore that and think about what do you want for your community, and then I think that would be that lawsuit's going to have its course with respect to his parties.
Bob?
Okay, I haven't been to the other meeting, so I'm coming fully ignorant, but let's say, jump ahead and say that this was approved, it came to a vote. I live 4 miles outside of town. I have my own water source, I have my own septic tank, and I have my own wall protection if I need it. What advantages would I have to vote for approval of the city in that situation, assuming that I was in the boundaries? In other words, what are the pros and cons? What's the advantages? What's it going to do for us?
Well, the underlying idea for me and many of us, I think, is the idea of local representation, local decision-making. So if you happen to find yourself in the city boundary, if you had a suggestion for your local government or a complaint about some terrible thing your local government had done, you wouldn't have to go to Eureka. You just have to go to the city hall. So there's one small issue. Also, as we're going to find out a lot more about, cities have the ability, with the approval of the electorate, to enhance, to raise the sales tax, to levy new and different taxes. So you would have a voice in those kinds of questions, and you might find yourself paying a quarter or half a cent more for your any retail purchase in the city to fund the city functions.
Would there be city taxes that I would somehow be have to pay? I mean, other than sales tax, would there be assessments?
Some cities have a enhanced sales tax to fund city government, and cities also have the ability to propose and with voter approval enact new and different taxes. And part of the idea with our proposal is that there may be a new source of tax revenue from legal marijuana business. Andy, I think you're next.
Yeah, I'm confused. If the sphere of influence boundary can go into Mendocino County, but we can't incorporate any of Mendocino County, and the boundary is supposed to represent something that can be incorporated in 5 years, how does that work?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure there are contradictions in the existing law, but that is how it works. It's within your planning area, But,
would you-
and I'm not exactly sure the advantages of having a sphere cross county boundaries, or, I know the Southern Humboldt Community Healthcare District sphere crosses in Mendo County.
And the school district.
And the school district. And so I can't specifically can't see
Well, would it
why.
interfere with the approval process since it definitely can't be incorporated within 5 years?
No, I think the sphere questions, I think I heard Alisha say that the sphere can be defined up to a year after the city is formed.
That's correct.
But the area being included in that sphere is an area likely to be added to the city within 5 years, isn't that what you said?
That's the idea. The idea is that it's an area where services may likely be extended. So those services, healthcare or whatever it may be, I mean, that is, in theory, that's the idea. You're not allowed to, the boundary, however, is still within the law, but the boundary is not allowed to extend outside the county. So maybe they're foreseeing that the city, I really don't know. I don't have an answer, a clear answer for that.
But if I could add one piece, I think one of the things that happens in a sphere of influence, in addition to that, but is that the neighboring jurisdiction, like say the county, for instance, which is the typical neighboring jurisdiction, since our cities are distinct, they're not contiguous. Anything the county might do, like say if the county was going to put a big retail center right outside of the city, that would have a dramatic effect. It could kill the city. And so I think that sphere of influence is there to sort of protect that jurisdiction from that kind of thing.
Dan?
I have a couple of things I would ask you to talk about. One is the role of the planning department in the city, what it can do. And the other question is, when you start a new one, you're not talking about adjusting boundaries, but a baseline. So how can we get a baseline inventory of what we have? Because isn't it correct that that is the threshold that we have to show that we can do better somehow by reorganizing within the city? Flip, maybe you
So
can-
I think what would be the task here now that I could come up with some follow-up for would be draw your amorphous boundary and it'll look like some kind of amoeba, and and based on topography, based on community, kind of take a stab at it or try a couple different ones, and then ideally have it conform to those tax district maps that Joe Mallet has. So you're working with something that's easy, so you're not splitting a district that's existing. Not to say that those couldn't be altered over time, but for easier math, pick an existing set of pieces, and then maybe come up with a couple different examples and give those to me, and I'll have the auditor start running the numbers on those, because there's going to be a sweet spot maybe for what works, and I know the city of Clear Lake, a friend of mine was the city manager there briefly, and they did a very late incorporation. I think it might have even been the 70s or 80s, and they incorporated 10 square miles. It's a vast area, and they overdid it. It was really they couldn't service that. They were really foundering kind of from the start. So you want to pick an area that is in service.
If I may have a follow-on on that, because we talked about the road. Now, my understanding is somebody is or isn't maintaining the roads down here. So it would be the same under a city, is that right? I mean, the same budget would then be spent by the city. I mean, somebody is either going to do it or not do it.
You would have the control to spend more or less on those roads.
Dan's first question was interesting and nobody touched on that. How would the planning department interact with this new city?
I think that's up for the city to determine that themselves. Because you do have land use planning authority at this point. And so how you want to implement that would be up to you, whether you want a planning department or contract out your planning services. I'm not sure. I think there are different approaches you can take. But you definitely are required to provide land use planning, which could be quite beneficial because then you have your own city general plan and have your own.
Do any of you have examples of cities that were created or were already in existence, creating their own like AOB process to what people have been talking about, grandfather everybody in? Is that an option?
It's certainly an option. I can't think of an example of someone who's done that. But, and the only hindrance would be existing state law as to what,
Like looking at Mendocino's Class K and just modeling that, but on a city level.
Yeah. Yeah, it would certainly, that would be one of those things that would clearly fall into local control. But the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg, thank you, Act, and other state laws that would define what there are some limitations in what you can do and not do, and then just water withdrawals, for instance, you're working with the same agencies, Fish and Game, you're working with the same kind of array of agencies that any other city or county would work with.
I've got a question about sphere of influence. When you first introduced the definition of the concept, you indicated that LAFCo's concern was about service provision in the near term or the medium term. And I'd like to get you to say something about charter cities versus general law cities, and I'm having these dreams about a city with a charter that talks about its sphere of influence and could potentially allow a city official to live in the sphere but not in the city boundary. Do you know anything about that?
I really do not, that's out of LAFCo's purview. I'm not too off the actual inner operations of the city, charter cities.
Right. I understand that from LAFCo's point of view, service provision is the key factor. But in a bigger context, I'm just wondering if a city's charter can make provisions for the sphere of influence that go beyond a 5-year prospect for extending garbage collection or something like that.
I don't know the answer to that question. I know, at least as far as the city of Arcata is concerned, they did address within their general plan that they didn't have an immediate intention to extend services or annex any lands within their sphere, but they wanted to retain that area within their sphere because they found it essential to their planning purposes, and they'd addressed it within their general plan that they wanted to retain a buffer and to basically protect those lands from protect their important ag lands and their working timberlands. And so this is kind of, that was unique and new because I think people are starting to take a different look as to what exactly a sphere could mean. Based upon the existing government code and the CKH Act, the intent of the sphere is to provide services, as I said, within that area in the next 5 years. But now people are being more proactive in their planning and saying, well, what about keeping our sphere as a means to protect that land? Or maybe in sometime in the 20-year time frame of our general plan, we may like to annex that to be timber working lands or whatever it may be. And so in that particular case, LAFCo went ahead and approved, because we had proposed that they reduce their sphere. We thought their sphere was too large. And so staff made that proposal to the city and to the commission. But the commission had decided and voted to retain the sphere as is, based upon the fact that it was within the city's general plan that they may pursue those lands in the future, even though it was outside of the 5-year purview of LAFCo. So I hope that helps a little. At least that was a unique situation.
That sounds flexible and interesting to me.
Yeah, and being at that meeting, there were, these were like near the Arcata Marsh. A lot of these are ag lands and wetlands that the city of Arcata has zero intention of developing, and also their own community forest. But they certainly want control over those, whereas, so typically in the old days, it was the sphere of influence is where the next subdivisions are marching out into the landscape. And now there's more of a thought of like the city wanting to control that, not for expansion, but for protection.
And I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think I'm aware of an example of a seat on the Eureka City Planning Commission being filled by someone who's not a Eureka resident. So I I think there's something to explore there.
And in their charter, it's by a 4/5 vote. If you want, it's 3/5 if you, if the person lives in the city. But if they want someone bad enough that it's gonna be out.
And is that for appointed officials, or, this is really just off the wall, but could a Eureka City Council person live outside the city?
I don't know.
No, they have wards and all that.
In that recent case, it was for an appointed planning commission.
Jared?
I want to ask some questions about how cities make money, the income side with taxes. Is the bed tax something that the city can charge, or is that something that's under, that the counties are reserved for the counties?
The city would get that, the
city would get all bed tax.
all the bed tax, other than,
all get it in the city.
and I'm not sure of this, but currently, the county bed tax, I believe 16% of that goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and 1.5% or some percentage to the Film Commission. There's some small chunks taken out. But that, for the county, the transient occupancy tax or the bed tax, a chunk of it comes back to to help the Garberville Chamber and be the gateway, the visitor center. And then the rest of that is general fund money, which helps, that's provide sheriff services and other county functions.
But the bed tax, in a new city, the bed tax in its entirety would be kept in the city?
I believe so, yeah.
And how about the sales tax? Is the city sales tax added on to the county, or does it replace the county sales tax?
It would replace the county sales tax. You would get that, but the bulk of that goes to the state for education. That's the hugest chunk, and I don't have that in front of me, but that's where you start with for Garberville, say $500,000, and by the time it's all whittled away and all those statewide pieces are taken out, the local chunk that the county gets now off of Garberville is about $20,000.
You're saying that was the property tax?
That's just property tax.
So there's property taxes that the county gets, and there's sales taxes the county gets, and there's bed taxes. There must be some other ones too, but those are the main ones.
There's a share of vehicle license fees that go to cities. There's several pots of money that we're coming to understand a little better incrementally. But it's my understanding there's several pots of money that are divided and shared between the cities and the county. And in some cases, those are negotiated arrangements.
And undeveloped resources.
And then Jared, just to sort of give a little broader view of property tax versus sales tax. The county runs mostly on property tax. And because of the reassessments, some large ones like Kohl's and Small Pulp Mill and Creamery that were revalued lower. And then all the small homeowner ones where somebody's house that was $350,000 and now it's $250,000, you can go into the county and get reassessed and get your property taxes reset based on that lower value. So, but then every time something sells, I mean a house from 1970 that sells, its property tax is really low, and that takes quite a jump up to current value. So that's been the balance. There's been the reassessments lower, then the resales ratcheted up higher. In like 08, 09, it was basically, property tax was still basically coming upward, not coming up quickly like it had been in earlier years, more like 04, 06 along in there, but it was still coming up slightly. Now it's finally dipped, and it'll take a while before that comes back. So that's why our toughest budget year is actually the one coming up for 11-12, fiscal year 11-12.
So I wonder if the county keeps most of the property taxes for the area, but the city can keep all its sales taxes and all its bed taxes?
Well, most cities run on, like City of Eureka, City of Fortuna, sales tax is really important. That's the biggest chunk of their revenue, because they don't have vast land area. And for the county, the bulk of our revenue is property tax. We both get some, but when sales tax takes a dive, it really, Eureka, for instance, Costco, all their big retail, all their car dealers, when sales tax goes down, the City of Eureka is immediately hurting. For us, as property tax, it's a little more of a slower process. So anyway, that's kind of the division typically between cities and counties, is sales tax versus property.
Woods.
I just want to remind folks, one thing that really hasn't been mentioned here is that a whole lot of the services that are provided by this potential government that you're thinking about, whatever form it takes, or any local government, are mandated very narrowly by state law. And so even if you contract out for services, they have to meet certain legal standards. So it isn't as if you could shine things on just because they're under your control now. There's a whole lot that has to meet very rigorous state standards. So that continues to be a high standard. My understanding is that 63% of the property tax goes to education. And so I kind of, I have a, you mentioned Clear Lake and 10 square miles. If we had 10 square miles here, a lot of that would be property tax. And the question that occurs to me is what then is the interface between the property taxes collected there and the Humboldt Unified School District, et cetera? In other words, how much that property tax can go to the incorporated entity, whether it's a city or whatever it is, versus how much of it has to then also be turned over to the schools, and how much do our local schools, are they continuing, does the new city have to provide funding for those, for the school system, in other words?
The school districts have their own district boundaries that would not change in this process. Southern Humboldt Unified School District would be its own. That same percentage that goes off to Sacramento for school districts and then or to schools, to education in general, and then comes back allocated to school districts. That would continue to happen.
That wouldn't change.
Yeah.
Brett?
Is liability insurance a requirement?
Most cities do belong to a self-insurance pool, so they don't have insurance, the acronym is RENEM, is the common one that people use.
I think risk and management are two of the words in there.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's a self-insurance pool.
Virginia?
Yeah, what happens to service districts, et cetera, fire protection districts and service districts that are within the boundaries of an incorporated city, a proposed city?
That's a very good question. I asked that
Yeah,
question.
I thought I knew the answer, but apparently I was confused. So.
And I'm not completely sure as to what would happen, and in this case it would be the GSD
And the RCSD, if
And
they're
possibly more.
And they would have
And
I've read over the procedure many times, and I saw that there was an opportunity for any existing agencies to comment on the process, and then they have an opportunity to go to the public hearing, and then again, if the proposal is approved, there's the protest hearing. And so, to the best of my knowledge, that is their opportunity to weigh in on the process. If LAFCo does approve the formation of the city, then that district would be dissolved, because you can't legally have two agencies providing the same service within the same geographical boundary. So that, though any existing districts providing those services would be dissolved, and then those services would then be transferred to the new city.
If I could just follow up on that with one question, because I am on the board of local CSD, so I know that having some of these answers is going to help us to weigh in on this at the beginning, because it's a feasibility. So we have several districts that potentially are going to be within the boundaries of the city, depending on where those boundaries are set. Some of them are quite small, some of them are larger, but there could be quite a lot of them. But they're not going to cover the entire, if the boundaries are drawn outside of just where they're Garberville, there's going to be areas that are outside of those districts. I think that's a very unusual situation. I sort of picture like a cell with little things inside of it. And the people who live within those districts have funded all of those services all this time through fees. principally, and they get a very tiny amount of property tax, but mostly through fees for services. And I just wonder if you have any idea, or how we can find out what would happen in the event of incorporation. You know, would we still continue to, you know, fee for services? Would it be an agency within an agency?
All of
for
those
example?
details should be clearly spelled out in the plan for services. So while I don't have an answer to that question, your plan for services should address that question, and needs to address that question.
Thank you. I'm done.